So I will begin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining.
I'm yet to let people into the meeting
Okay.
room, so I'll just admit them all.
Mhm. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Please put in the chat where you are joining us from today. We know we appreciate that it's super early or super late for some of you. So thank you very much. So welcome to our virtual gender cafe, understanding and countering anti-gender movements. My name is Ellen Bumasang and my pronouns and she and her. I am an SGP member and co-lead of the Events and Professional Development Committee. Before we start, let me just give you a brief introduction about SGP before we give the mic to Saira Zuberi, our moderator. Next slide, please. So, the Society of Gender Professionals, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, SGP is a leading global membership-based association of gender practitioners, academics, and activists dedicated to promoting feminist action and applied research and raising the profile of gender expertise around the world. So on the screen, you will see our mission, which includes supporting member collaboration, network building, mentoring and leadership, and advancing gender equity through feminist action and applied gender research. So our vision for SGP is for it to become the largest cross-sectoral network of gender specialists worldwide, with members who feel empowered with the resources and networks they need to thrive in their careers as gender specialists and to advance gender equality in their communities through coordinated feminist action. Next slide, please. So SGP has two main types of engagement. We have subscribers and supporters, like many of you who receive the monthly newsletter, occasional emails, or those who follow SGP on social media. And we also have registered members who pay annual membership dues. So we have members located all around the world and a membership structure with exclusive benefits. So you can check out our website, which is genderprofessionals.org, and become members. So if you become an SGP member, you provide critical resources to help SGP do the crucial feminist network building work. So we are fully volunteer run and funded through membership dues only. So today we have a growing community of over 45,000 members, subscribers, followers, and supporters in over four social media channels and very active engagement, especially on LinkedIn and Facebook. And we also have a closed Facebook community forum and a pilot closed LinkedIn group for current and former registered members. Next slide. So based on our data available on our registered members, we have, and for those who have signed up since the membership system was set up in 2019, we are located in 81 countries listed here. So looking broadly at all of SGP's online followership on social media and the countries provided in their profiles, our followers and supporters are located in 114 different countries. Next slide. So today we're having a virtual gender cafe. So one of the things that SGP does is to foster the production and dissemination of applied gender research, and that is through our gender cafe. So these events provide the space for feminist discussion and conversation and collaboration. So we have one every few months, and so these gender cafes provide a platform for connecting gender practitioners, academics, and activists, and for non-hierarchical sharing, questioning, and learning beyond the classroom. It's also an opportunity for professional development for members interested in raising their profile or gender expertise. Next slide. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Saira Zuberi, and she will introduce herself to you and then go on with our Gender Cafe. Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome everybody. Sarah Zuberi, as Ellen said. And the reason that I have put my pronouns as she or they or contextual is that we are speaking in English, which has gendered pronoun. Not every language that I speak has gendered pronoun. Some of them do and some of them don't. We all use pronouns, however. So in English, I'm fine with she and they. And you have a brief bit of detail on the slide about myself, but essentially I'm a consultant researcher. I've worked for a number of different women's rights and other rights-based organizations and networks over the years. Currently, I'm working at the local level in Toronto in the north of Turtle Island, which is North America, and the settler state of Canada. And I'm focusing on accessibility and disability rights. So it's not the best practice in accessibility to be having slides with quite so much detail or so much text. And I'm not going to read it all because everybody will have access. We will post the presentation and the portion of the open public portion of this event, not the breakout rooms. That video will all be posted on the website soon after the event. So we don't need to go into it. But suffice it to say, I did work on gender issues since my studies at SOAS, where I had worked on abortion and birth control in legal theory, in Muslim legal theories. And later on, I joined AWID and worked on the Challenging Fundamentalisms program, which was looking at the issue of anti-gender movements from another lens. We were looking at how religion and culture is used and mobilized across all the regions and religions of the globe. It's happening everywhere. So since 2008 to 2014, I was working on that project, which ties in very closely to our subject today. Next slide.
I really want to say.
Can people who aren't speaking please mute themselves? Thank you. And we'll just quickly go over the agenda. So we've gone over a summary about SGP, and then for the Gender Cafe, we'll quickly go over the goals. We have 4 panel presentations. We'll discuss agreements very briefly and then have small group discussions for hopefully for 15 minutes. I'm going to do my best to keep the timekeeping efficient because we have a lot of speakers. Next slide, please. Essentially, we've asked our speakers that they focus on sharing about recent trends in anti-gender narratives, movements, strategies that are in our different locations that we're coming from, share experiences of responding to those anti-gender movements across these diverse feminist networks and country contexts that we're bringing together, and make a space to discuss the challenges that are posed by anti-gender movements and strategize given the growing need for collaboration and protection of our rights-based frameworks and the gains that we've made. And next slide, please. So the key questions for the panelists were to have speakers share about anti-gender movements in their focus countries, how they emerged, who are the main actors, what strategies they use, and what are feminist networks and organizations doing to respond. And then we can dig into some of these questions in the breakout room. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our first panel presentation from Dr. Gerdana Tsetkova. She is a research fellow at Ca' Foscari University of Venice, where she leads the project Stereotyping, Disinformation, and Politicization: Links Between Attacks Against the Istanbul Convention and Increased Online Gender-Based Violence, funded by the EU's Horizon program. And again, I won't go through all of the details. We'll jump into Gerdana's presentation. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can we have the next slide, please? So thank you all for being here today, and I'm really happy to be attending this gender cafe and share a bit about the anti-gender movement in Bulgaria, which is my home country. I'm looking forward to all the interesting presentations and the following discussions in our breakout sessions. When I talk about the anti-gender movement in Bulgaria, I decided to focus on one episode, or rather a series of episodes which were related to the failure to ratify the Istanbul Convention. You can see the full name of the Istanbul Convention on the slide. So it's a human rights treaty which entered into force in 2014, and until now it has 38 member parties, because recently the European Union also ratified the convention. However, Bulgaria was one of the countries that signed the convention, but that then did not ratify it. Later on, we will find out maybe about a country that withdrew from the convention, unfortunately, recently. What was the immediate reason for the non-ratification? Well, basically in 2018, the Bulgarian Constitutional Court ruled that two of the articles of the convention contradicted the Bulgarian constitution. Interestingly, these were the articles that tried to define gender. This was cemented, this inability to settle what gender is, was cemented by another decision of the same court in 2021. The decision said that, as used in the Bulgarian constitution, the word sex should be understood only in its biological sense. And here is the time to explore the purely linguistic dimension of the matter when it comes to the Istanbul Convention and gender in Bulgaria. Namely that both sex and gender are currently translated in Bulgarian using a single term. So when there were discussions about the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, the translation suggested for gender was social gender, which led to the complete manipulation of the term. Following these discussions, currently there is no agreed on term to translate gender into Bulgarian, and the term is misused. It might be used as a parodic and derogatory noun to refer to someone belonging to the LGBTI+ community, or a way to mock a person who opposes patriarchy or adopts a liberal worldview. Next slide, please. Very briefly, why this shouldn't have been a problem? Because the term gender is not new, and it appears in many other documents that Bulgaria has signed, ratified through the years, EU directives that are binding for the country. But since 2017 and 2008, when there was an organized campaign against the Istanbul Convention and the ideas embodied in it, gender, or rather its negation, became tightly linked to the preservation of traditional or Christian values and the tradition of Bulgarian family. This happened in many other European countries as well. Next slide, please. Very briefly, three illustrations of how this link between the negation of gender and the preservation of the family appears as described by many actors in Bulgarian society. So firstly, in 2017, an open letter by more than 50 organizations said that the Istanbul Convention should not be ratified, because if society loses the ability to distinguish between a woman and a man, the fight against violence against women remains only a formal commitment. I bolded this sentence because, interestingly, it appears almost verbatim in the 2018 decision of the Constitutional Court, which I mentioned earlier. The court also says that the convention, by defining gender as a social construct, relativizes the boundaries of the two sexes, male and female, as biologically determined. In 2018, there was a declaration by the Union of Bulgarian Writers, which said that the Istanbul Convention should not be ratified because this will actually prevent Bulgaria from preserving its original Christian values, which the country has kept for many years, and they have protected us from divergent assimilationist invasions. Next slide, please. Thirdly, in 2020, when discussions about the ratification of the convention by the European Union itself started, there was another attack. There was a declaration by the Bulgarian NGO Rod International. And in this declaration, they basically say that the convention threatens the traditional model of marriage and family, considering it as a source of violence. And furthermore, if the European Union ratifies the convention, its member states will have to accept gender ideology. This is maybe the time where the term started appearing really, really very much in the anti-Istanbul Convention discourse. To accept gender ideology by removing the biological definition of sex and replacing it with an interpretation as a socio-cultural concept. And actually many experts in Bulgaria, also people who are not experts in gender or gender issues per se, but they study disinformation, claim that this particular attack against the Istanbul Convention and other amendments related to introducing greater protection of women victims of violence constituted, in fact, disinformation. Because as we can see, the same talking points, the same arguments by the anti-gender let's say supporters in Bulgaria appeared again. The arguments they use most often when they participate in political or social debates is that sexual education in schools means advancing the dangerous gender ideology. The children are sexualized and corrupted because now they have 40 sexes or genders to choose from. Bulgarian NGOs are helping foreigners steal Bulgarian children. And last but not least, the EU is trying to impose on Bulgaria foreign attitudes, values, a foreign way of life, which threatens traditional families, Christian values, Bulgarian sovereignty, and Bulgarian national identity. Next slide, please. Where does Bulgaria fit into the global anti-gender movement? Because I see that I only have 3 or 4 minutes left. I just recommend taking a look at these reports. They really well illustrate the influence and actually the very good funding that the anti-gender movement is receiving in Europe. I would like to focus on the last bullet point here, being that just a week ago in Bulgaria, in the capital of Bulgaria, was held the 4th International Conference, Liberal Extremism, a Threat to Democracy and Fundamental Human Rights. I actually tried to listen to some of the speeches online, and basically all the bullet points that I had mentioned in the previous slides were elaborated on and were used. So sexualization, the introduction of gender ideology in schools. Yes, so it's something quite recent, so it's going on still. Next slide, please.
2 minutes left.
Thanks. What were the consequences of these vicious campaigns, organized, disinformative vicious campaigns, and the failure to ratify the Istanbul Convention? Firstly, this manipulative and misleading interpretation of gender impedes efforts to enhance prevention of violence against women, domestic violence, develop protection mechanisms, and advance women's rights. By the way, especially now in the context of Bulgaria, I'm using violence against women and domestic violence because in Bulgaria there is no legal definition, no legal term, gender-based violence still. Secondly, the villainization and the stigmatization of the LGBTI community intensified, and negative and untruthful portrayals of the communities researched. Thirdly, we have as a consequence deepening social divisions, frequently fueled by the spread of misinformation, disinformation, particularly disinformation promoting anti-EU, anti-liberal, and anti-feminist statements. Next slide, please.
1 minute.
What was the reaction? So definitely there is a better understanding that there is violence against women and it's a serious problem. NGOs organized numerous protests, citizens joined, NGOs have a saying at the table when policies and legislations and strategies are discussed. But what more can we do? There are already calls, and I agree with them, that there should be a broader discussion about the Bulgarian feminism of the 21st century. What should it look like? Where it fits in the global movement? There should be an even stronger cooperation within the civil society between NGOs working on different topics. The civil sector should broaden its perspective even further and adopt intersectional approaches where possible. Ideally, there should be stronger political will and better education with respect to topics like human rights, women's rights, gender-based violence, gender studies, and gender equality. Thank you so much, and I really look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Gergana. And without further ado, we will move forward to the next presentation from Dr. Stella Bosire. Dr. Stella Bosire is the founding executive director of the Africa Center for Health Systems and Gender Justice and co-executive director of East Africa Sexual and Health Rights Initiative, as well as CEO of the Kenya Medical Association and vice chair of the HIV/AIDS Tribunal of Kenya. Again, I'm not going to read all of Stella's accomplishments. There are many, and you will have access to this presentation afterwards on the website, and we'll send around a link. So with that, please take it away, Stella. Stella doesn't have a slide presentation, so we'll just stay on this slide.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much, Zaira. Such a pleasure to have this conversation and just to situate it within the African context. One of the things that I keep affirming is that I'm an activist first before anything. I'm an activist feminist first before anything. And so my perspective are going to be very hugely deepened around feminism. And so the first thing that we have to recognize is that the anti-rights, anti-gender, and I really like the framing currently of the feminists around calling it as it is. It's an anti-rights movement that incorporates anti-gender in it, is that has been developing in Africa for the last 20 years. And it has shown up in very different areas. One of the ways in which is that there have been a pushback around freedom of individuals, you know what? Protests and individuals that protest, rights to access to care, rights to freedom of expression. And we've seen how silencing that has even pushed some of the feminist stances. You can see, like, for example, in Uganda, Stella Nyanzi. We've also seen hugely anti-LGBTIQ, anti-comprehensive sexuality education, anti-sexual and reproductive health and rights broadly building up. And we are even seeing right now people who are actually pushing for GBV, you know. And in the essence is that there was a doctor in Kenya who sued the government because they wanted to legalize female genital mutilation. And you can see where that is coming from, some of the huge issues that we have within the continent around anti-rights. And so the other examples I want to also give is we saw in 2018 the closure of abortion clinics within the country. We've seen around the framing of family values, which are actually entrenched within legislation, and in some countries where there's constitutional reforms in the continent, that being also entrenched in there. We've also seen first ladies who've always loved animals and elephants really coming together and saying, in Kenya and Uganda, we've seen in the Ugandan context anti-CSC. The first lady has been the Minister of Education since I've existed, and she has actually been pushing back against comprehensive sexuality education. The second lady in Kenya is actually running a campaign for boy child, you know, as she calls it. But really, if you look at the context, it's actually very regressive in terms of the milestones that we've gained around safeguarding the rights of women, girls, and gender diverse persons. So we've also seen, again, the anti-homosexual act that was passed in Uganda. There's a bill currently in parliament in Kenya. Burundi and Tanzania, we saw the other day the president of Tanzania really speaking about there's no place for homosexuals within the country. And so we see even another huge mushrooming push, and which is being pushed by particularly those who are aligned to Catholics around family planning and contraceptives, you know, and misinformation anchored around medical misinformation around access to some of the contraceptives, really pushing and saying that it's cause infertility, some of unfounded, scientifically claims that we don't see. And so there are ways in which the consequences of this pushback has shown and it continues to show. One of the ways in which we are seeing it is actually aligning in development frameworks and discourse. Just from the feminist foreign policy in Netherlands. And, after having such an amazing conference, at the end of it, you hear the language that is being pushed around women, girls, really excluding gender diverse person, really just looking at biology and not just thinking about other expressions in which individuals could actually express themselves. A place where, when one of the conversations you're having around economic empowerment, really denigrating the role of women and integrating, mainstreaming women in economic conversations, and also pushing back against the militarization that is experienced within the world. But the conference was actually being sponsored and led by the Dutch government too. Also came out with all these information that was very uncomfortable. We also saw international agreements during Trump's time that touched within African countries, called the Geneva Consensus Declaration, asking the African presidents to co-sign to be able to actually not have programs or interventions around access to safe abortion, access to contraceptives, and all programs that were funded by PEPFAR USAID were defunded if they actually were programming around even LGBTIQ persons. We've seen also what has been happening in academic institutions, where now they're being funded to actually push back against some of the ideologies, really cement the gender ideology, which is non-progressive. And most of these are being quoted by governments, being quoted by other individuals. And so it's something that we have to also delve deeply into. And so the other ways in which we've seen feminists respond within the continent, and I really love the solidarity that continues to grow. One of the ways in which that has shown is around research. There has to be investments, and there continues to be investments in research to be able to generate counter narratives, counter some of the recommendations they're giving to government based on evidence. And I'm seeing a very huge body of knowledge that is being built by feminists within the continent around what that looks like. The other thing is also the feminists have been following the money, the coordination and funding within anti-rights, anti-gender movement. It's hugely. And so now we just don't say follow the money, we name them. We have a list, we name them. And then I'm very grateful that there's even plans around legal action against some of these institutions, particularly because the infringement of rights and freedoms of women, girls, and gender diverse person has actually led to loss of life in different jurisdictions. The other thing that I'm seeing is actually cross-national, cross-sectoral collaborations around those who work in economic empowerment, environmental justice, reproductive rights, coming together and saying that the tool that the master uses is one. And so we must be able to come together and collaborate and be able to just find strategic ways in which we speak in one language. We have the same metrics that we're measuring around what this impact looks like. And so we can be able to even co-collaborate in terms of having interventions that cut across different sectors. And that has been so powerful. The other ways in which we continue to see is a huge rising number of protest marches, that women are coming out, and it's just women, it's queer people, it's young girls, it's even individuals who align to certain religious affiliations coming out and say that we need to be able to safeguard the rights of women. We need to be able to be pro-LGBTIQ, framing access, the rights to release the freedom of religion around anchoring it, not being separating it from sexual and reproductive health and rights, not being able to actually be separating it from interventions that are supposed to address gender-based violence, but also really anti-rights, anti-gender ideologies. And so I know my time is about up before I'm being told, but I hope that we are going to explore more about how this looks like in terms of some of the interventions that we've been able to make within the continent. Is some of the legal and policy frameworks I've mentioned around research, solidarity building, and also just solidarity messaging and strategic communications around how it is that we are able to pass our message around. And so I welcome some of your thoughts around how we can actually strengthen this movement within the continent to be able to not lose what we've actually lost previously, but also to make many gain more milestones socially, economically, politically, legally, environmentally, as we make this world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella, and you really took me back. This is I think it was in 2009 that MP David Bahati in Uganda had introduced the initial anti-homosexuality bill. And
In
as the
Uganda.
Challenging Fundamentalism program at AWID, we were very vocally supporting Ugandan civil society organizations and networks. Obviously it was created into an LGBTQI organization, but other organizations and networks as well that were pushing back. And the research that was published by Political Research Associates in the USA, the research of Dr. Kapia, I think, was focusing on how that original bill went to the parliament in Uganda, but was actually written by US evangelicals and delivered to David Bahati. So as those far right-wing anti-gender, anti-rights movements from the Christian right in the US were feeling that they were losing ground in their own country as equal marriage rights were coming in, et cetera. They said, okay, let us focus on the majority world and let us focus on parts of the world where we can try and influence from the external side. And of course, we are seeing some of the results and the need for greater coordination between us all to counter this manipulation of rights-based language and push back against our gains. And now we'll move on to the next slide. And our next presenter, Violeta Colma. Violeta is a feminist public policy specialist. She's a human rights lawyer, co-founder of Consultorio Jurídico Feminista from Paraguay, a feminist legal clinic where she conducts legal research and leads advocacy in communications, and also part of civil society organization Mundo Sur, researching and following hate crime cases against LGBTQI people in Latin America. And again, I won't go through all of Violeta's great accomplishments. We will jump into her presentation instead. Next slide.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here, and special thanks to the Society of Gender Professionals for making room for such a meaningful conversation. I will talk about Paraguay, but first I will talk about Latin America because anti-gender movements, as we've seen, are transnational, and they share similarities and coordinated actions across the region. So just a little bit also about the origins of the so-called gender ideology for some context. In the 90s, we saw the rise of the gender perspective as part of international conventions, conferences around the world, from the United Nations to other regional forums, and also through laws that advance women's rights in many countries. In response, the Vatican presented a solid opposition, and these years also saw the rise of Joseph Ratzinger, and he was who developed the notion of gender ideology through his interpretation of theology and traditional values. And he later became, surprise, surprise, the Pope Benedict XVI, and doubled down on a conservative school of thought as the head of the Catholic Church. But this is enough about that part of the history. So now let's move forward to the present. So contemporary anti-gender mobilizations started in Europe and later expanded to Latin America. This rhetoric was no longer confined to the institution of the Catholic Church, but showed an intersection with other political projects and a more extensive set of actors. It is essential to notice that this backlash started in Latin America at a time when the feminist and broader human rights movement were mainstream actors in the public sphere, having achieved progress around sexual and reproductive rights and LGBTQ issues. This also coincided with a period of progressive left-wing governments in the region during the first 15 years of the 2000s. In 2016, a new transnational anti-gender movement started in Peru. Their key message significantly impacted the parents' fear of a potential loss of authority in front of the government, and this group took the name of Con mis hijos no te metas, do not mess with my children, and rapidly spread throughout the region. This resonates a lot with what the previous speakers have been saying as well. If we move to the next slide, you will see a picture of a priest shaking hands with the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. Because the Holy See is a state, they have ambassadors to the OAS and to the United Nations. You can also see a banner with a message that says, OEAs, women are defined by biology and not ideology. This was paid for by anti-rights groups in Peru during the Assembly General of the OEAs in Lima last year. Okay, now I'm going to discuss the characteristics of Latin American anti-gender and anti-rights movements. So currently, anti-rights groups have developed a strategy to repeal progressive legislation and policies throughout different Latin American countries on two levels. The first is the dismissal of international treaties on human rights ratified as part of national laws. And the argument used to reject these progressive legal frameworks is that they were created by foreign powers and imposed as a modern type of colonialism. So therefore, the mission of these anti-rights movements is not only the defense of the so-called traditional values of Latin American societies, the values of the quote-unquote natural family, but also the defense of national sovereignty. The second level is to weaken the international bodies that advance human rights from the inside. This is done by creating national and regional nonprofits and NGOs and registering them as civil society organizations in the same institutions they reject, like the United Nations or the Organization of American States. By doing this, they move from an openly religious front to a secular and pseudo-scientific approach to lobby against resolutions on human rights and dismantle the existing ones. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to share a little bit more about the Paraguayan case. In 2017, the Ministry of Education banned the use and dissemination of all educational materials that refer to gender ideology and gender theory. The resolution sought to strengthen the family as a natural environment of education. The actual effect was censorship from the state to any possible conversation about sex education, harmful gender stereotypes, non-discrimination, protection from abuse, and even gender-based violence in schools. These rights are all guaranteed by the Constitution and other laws, by the way. Earlier this year, now in 2023, a group of senators presented a bill to prohibit and criminally punish the inclusion of gender perspective in education. This proposal demonstrated negligence and a lack of understanding of basic constitutional issues about the right to education, equality, and freedom of expression. Creating an atmosphere of unfounded fears generates a scenario where political decisions are inconsistent with reality, adopting restrictive measures to freedom of expression. And also this bill was reminiscent of the times of the military dictatorship that lasted over 35 years until 1989 in Paraguay, the longest one in Latin America. What's worse, lying to the population in this manner, inventing a non-existing threat, the threat of gender ideology, serves as a tool to divert attention from cases of corruption, misappropriation of public funds, and the increasing power of drug cartels within our institutions. The proposed bill clashed with fundamental principles of our Constitution, international treaties, and current laws. And the Consultorio Jurídico Feminista, or Feminist Legal Clinic where I work, published an in-depth legal analysis that dismantled the bill point by point. In a press release, we stated that sadly, we're not just in the hands of evil people, but also people who are inept in their evil projects. The bill was dropped after, and this is still this year, the bill was dropped after a horrific femicide case that shocked the entire Paraguayan society because of its brutality, also showing the effects of the anti-gender discourse in people's everyday life. Still, other efforts remain, such as the refusal to receive funds from the European Union destined to improve infrastructure in schools because the project called for transformative education. or more recently, the dissemination by the Ministry of Education of a booklet called 12 Sciences for the Education of Affection and Sexuality that is actually promoted by religious sectors and has no real foundation in science whatsoever. Civil society has been alert and presented organized responses in each occasion, including groups of parents who defend secular education, youth advocates, students, LGBTQ and feminist organizations, and women journalists and politicians. Still, the constant battle is a struggle, and there's always an increased risk to the more visible speakers from these movements, especially to women and LGBTQ people. And this is just a summary of what is happening in Paraguay. So from what I've been sharing, these attacks might seem to focus on education, but the anti-rights movement actually pushed for a political agenda beyond mere educational matters, profoundly affecting elections, democratic institutions, and access to justice. So to conclude my presentation, I want to emphasize how anti-gender movements are organized at a transnational level, and how their impact can be seen all over the region, in Latin America and at a global level as well. This affects countries with both small and large economies, either with a predominantly Catholic or evangelical influence, and across the American continent. And beyond just a trend, the boogeyman of gender ideology has become part of everyday political life, dictating decisions taken in the legislative, judicial, and executive sphere. In the same way, the constant work of feminist activists and organizations and human rights defenders in general is key to countering these advances. So to conclude, my message today is to ask you all, please become active in your community if you can, and fight the good fight for those who can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Violeta. And yes, you had mentioned the special role that the Vatican gets in spaces like the UN and the OAS, and that's something we were very aware of working on the religious fundamentalisms program at AWID, that not only does the Vatican have that special place, but then we also have those states that are sympathetic. So where the Vatican is behaving as a state at the UN or at other multilateral organizations, or where they're having observer status, they're also linking up with different governments. So, Russia or Qatar or Brazil, when it was still under Bolsonaro, different states will line up and support each other on these anti-gender initiatives, such as trying to introduce the right of religions, like religions have the right not to be defamed. They try to introduce this, the Human Rights Council, the rights of family rights, parental rights. So twisting human rights concepts in those spaces and bringing in large Christian or faith-based, or sometimes they don't even call themselves faith-based, they call themselves rights NGOs, but they're actually twisting rights concepts, and these actors will collaborate and coordinate in those multilateral spaces, decision-making spaces. So it's actually very common, and it has been going on for decades. They will also hold huge congresses, World Congress of the Families, and they started holding this begun in the US, but they started holding them in Russia under Putin's regime, of course, very sympathetic. So they're definitely transnational movements, and all of our coordinating efforts are important to keep pushing back. So without further ado, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll just introduce our next speaker, Sina. Next slide, please. And Sinem is the founder and CEO of GenderScope and has been active as a gender consultant for over a decade, focusing on anti-discrimination law, protection of vulnerable groups, and organizational gender mainstreaming. And again, I won't cover all of her accomplishments. We'll go straight into Sinem's presentation. Please take it away, Sinem. Next.
Thank you very much, Zaira. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So hello, I'm Sinem, and it's both an honor and exhilarating experience to be with you today. And I'm eager to engage in a total exchange of diverse experiences and insights from around the world. Actually, it's been quite already very interesting to learn similarities among countries. And I'm sure that we're going to have a great discussion at the end today, at the end. Next slide. No, this slide, I think. Yeah, flow. Okay. So today, my focus is on shedding light on the anti-gender movement in Turkey. By the way, we say Turkey, and not anymore. I mean, not anymore Turkey. So I'm going to say Turkey. A topic of significant global relevance. I trust that my brief presentation will contribute to our collective understanding and fuel an open and enlightening discussion on this crucial issue. So allow me to guide you through the trajectory of my speech. So to start, as you can see, I'll provide a quick overview of my understanding of the anti-gender movement. Following that, I'll give a brief backdrop of Turkey's political landscape from 2010 to the present. And this background information will help set the stage for the examples I'll be discussing on the three facets of the anti-gender movement: legal, political, and sociological. Lastly, I'll touch on my projections for the future of the anti-gender movement and suggest potential responses. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. Okay, so to commence, I want to provide a nuanced definition of the anti-gender movement, grounding my understanding in a global context. So this movement, as I said, manifests as a populist and illiberal reaction to the political liberation of women and LGBTIQ plus individuals worldwide. This unsettling of the neoliberal global order challenges the entrenched trinity of nation, state, and family, making the anti-gender movement a powerful force, both aggressive and defensive on a global scale. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. No.
There's
Something
minor.
happened. Thank you. No.
Just having some technical issues.
Okay.
We're back.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, that's great. So moving specifically to the Turkish context, the anti-gender movement takes on a unique form. Unlike European examples, it was not a societal response to gender-based freedoms, but rather a state-driven discourse aimed at fortifying an authoritarian regime. Understanding this requires a glimpse into Turkey's political landscape, predominantly dominated by the Justice and Development Party, the so-called AKP, for the past 21 years, led by President Erdogan. Understanding the AKP's evolution from a conservative democratic
I'm sorry, Sinem, you've been muted somehow. Okay.
Okay, sorry. Advocating for the rights of urban conservative women to an authoritarian one-man party, aligning with global anti-gender rhetoric is crucial in comprehending the anti-gender movement in Turkey. Particularly, the period from 2010 to 2016, which I call the gray period, witnessed a shift marked by changes in laws favoring the police and security personnel and a slow but noticeable departure from a modern discourse on gender rights. During this period, the AKP initiated discussions asserting that the West is a Christian alliance, or Turkey possesses distinct values differing from the West. So this marked the commencement of a narrative that aimed to delegitimize human rights values, encompassing global gender rights, equality policies, and the prevention of violence against women. So the subsequent phase between 2016 to 2022, aptly termed masculinism's restoration by Candioti, So a stark reversal of gender policies culminating in Turkey's explicit opposition to the Istanbul Convention. The recent general election in May 2023 adds a layer of uncertainty to the future trajectory of gender politics in Turkey, a subject I will delve into the last part of my presentation. Next slide, please. Okay. So to delve into the complexities of the anti-gender movement, I'll illustrate its multifaceted nature by offering examples from three distinct perspectives: legal, political, and sociological. In the legal realm, we witness continuous assaults on women's rights through various attempts to amend gender-related provisions in the crucial legislations, such as the Turkish Penal Code, Civil Code, and Law Number 6284, which addresses prevention against domestic violence. The second significant example is the withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention. Far-right, conservative, and ultra-Islamist alliances pushing for regressive policies lobbied against this convention. They echoed anti-gender sentiments seen in Europe with arguments that the convention is a threat to the family union, traditional family values, and promotes homosexuality and same-sex marriages. Gender has become the target of these groups who insist on the fundamentalist and religious understandings of gender roles. In the end, Turkey withdrew from the convention in July 2021. The third example is the recent discussions around elementary rights of divorced women. These discussions have fueled by activist men calling themselves as victims of gender equal regulations, and they say that the money women get as alimony is unfair and it supposedly pushes them into adultery after a divorce. So they claim women take advantage of men because of laws that they think unfairly favor women. The idea behind their anti-alimony advocacy is that these changes will somehow lower divorce rates and cut down on violence against women. So next slide, please. Concerning the political facet, it's crucial to highlight the substantial reduction in the space for civic participation in marches and independent organizations during the AKP rule. Feminist and pride marches in particular have faced police intervention, leading to discreditation. Simultaneously, activists participating in these events, encompassing feminists, LGBTIQ plus advocates, and human rights defenders, have been unjustly labeled as terrorists. This labeling served to stigmatize women and queer communities within societal perceptions. Moreover, over recent years, concepts like gender and gender equality have faced censorship in school curricula, reflecting a shift in state resources from secular to religious education. Next slide, please.
2 minutes.
Okay, and so lastly, exploring the sociological dimension, the first example centers on the rise of religious voices promoting gender justice over gender equality. This shift, influenced by global religious organizations, posits gender justice as more compatible with Turkish Islamic culture and superior to the Western notion of gender equality. So the second sociological trend in relation to this involves the condemnation of gender equality as gender ideology, a term newly introduced into Turkish gender politics. Journalists and Islamist intellectuals have begun using this term, aligning with the global discourse against gender issues. The third example is tied to the neoliberal interpretation of family values, where women are expected to adhere to traditional roles, stay at home, and receive welfare benefits only if they fulfill prescribed family-based caring duties. This also entails a woman figure who is married, having at least 3 children, subordinated faithful mother. Next slide, please. So as we navigate these complexities, we must contemplate the future. The recent election held in May 2023 resulted in a concerning rise of an explicit anti-gender bloc in the parliament, embodied by pro and ultra-Islamist parties and initiatives such as Yeniden Refah Party, Saadet Party, or Hüdapar. So this bloc exhibits an exceptionally strong anti-LGBTIQ plus stance, advocating for the shutdown of all LGBTIQ plus organizations in Turkey. Furthermore, they support and justify child marriages, referring to them as young marriages, and actively lobby for Turkey's withdrawal from the Council of Europe Convention on the Protection of Children Against Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse, Lanzarote Convention, an international accord that Turkey signed in 2011. So all of this indicates an acceleration of the anti-gender movement and consolidation of anti-gender rhetoric as a state discourse. Responding to this challenge requires international feminist democratic organizing, fostering intersectional solidarity to counteract the impending threats. In conclusion, the anti-gender movement in Turkey is not a standalone issue, but a reflection of broader global tensions. Our collective efforts, grounded in international solidarity and the commitment to democratic values, can serve as a resilient force against the assault of regressive ideologies. Thank you for listening, and I'm really looking forward to discussions in the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sinem. And it's interesting that you referenced Dr. Denise Candiotti, and Dr. Denise Candiotti was one of, there were, over 100 different people that were consulted and that were part of a steering committee and that engaged in the setup of AWID's work.
Yeah, she's a great academic. Yeah, I appreciate her a lot.
And she worked on the challenging fundamentals of the program at AWID and was a great supporter. So many threads tying into that work from all of the presentations. So we'll move on to the next slide. And so we'll be going into breakout room activities. We'll share the contacts of speakers in the chat so that people can reach out if you want to get in touch with anyone. And moving on to the next slide, we're just going to talk a little bit about agreements. So as we go into the space and we have some time for breakout room discussions, there'll be introductions in that space and sharing of some questions together. And then hopefully we have enough time after about 15 to 20 minutes of breakout discussion to come back in plenary and share some highlights. So please have somebody assigned as a note taker in the breakout groups. And before we head in, just sharing the community norms, just take a moment to add anything that you want to in the chat if there is anything, but participate. It's a participatory, non-hierarchical community space, and we want to hear from everybody. Acknowledge the digital divide and the language barriers. English is not the first language for many, many people here. It may be second, third, fourth, fifth language. Respect each other. Everyone's presence, identities, and contributions are valued and respected. We'll speak in I terms. We'll speak for ourselves. Apply intersectionality. Strive to deconstruct the issue using an intersectional lens, centering the experiences of non-binary, transgender, and gender non-conforming and racialized people and people from the majority world. Consider the emotional labor of those who are personally affected by these issues when sharing our views today. Take space and make space. If you've already spoken on a topic, consider posting your comment in the chat. And if you prefer using the chat box within the breakouts, that's fine as well, of course. And practice active listening. Listen to understand and not to respond or react. And I didn't catch if there were any additions in the chat, but I'm sure my SGP comrades will let me know. And the quote on the slide, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and rights to exist, is from James Baldwin. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so you'll see this window pop up. We'll go into breakout rooms when you see the notification on your screen and you click on the blue join breakout room button. After about between 15 to 20 minutes, we'll see how much we have. We'll return to the main room for the debrief. Next slide. Breakout room questions that are of focus, and you can copy them from the chat. I'll drop those in a second. the questions are, what lessons can we learn from the experiences with anti-gender movements in the country context we've heard about today and from our own context, and what would a coordinated response look like from activists, networks, coalitions, donors, etc. And you should see the pop-up coming up shortly. Welcome back, everybody. And thank you so much. That was one of our best attended gender cafes. I think it was very well sort of attended, and I think this is an issue that many people have great concern and interest in. So great to hear that. We just want to see if there's, I don't know if every room managed, but if we have somebody who took a few notes, can people volunteer to share from the breakout rooms that you were in what the highlights were? I can pick on Sarah, who I know volunteered to take notes in our room, if you don't mind.
One second. Okay. Yeah, I was going to kind of look them over and synthesize, but what we talked about were the importance of creating a unified network to combat the unified anti-gender movement, looking at all the continuity of these issues, highlighted a couple spaces that could be more ways to engage. I mentioned the International Studies Association with academics. Another person introduced the Sexual Violence Research Initiative as another space to build the coalition. And then some other points raised about how can we build political will, the absence of Asian, South Asian voices, and at the end, this role, again, with how well we're organized, that can play a role in how democratic norms can listen to us, with the counter being that religious groups in some of these spaces are very well organized. So when parties are trying to win seats, they see that faction has they're very well organized, so it makes it easier for parties to go with that position simply from the position of getting clear votes and support. And so how we could do the same is kind of an open-ended question, but a good place to start. That's my
Thank you so much. Thank you. Any other note takers from the other breakout groups?
I can try. I was facilitating as well, but I'll lean on Anya and Deb and even Stella to follow up really quickly. But we talked about the strategy around messaging and communications, and how do we do that in a way that we're able to move the needle, get what we need to have done. So look at the messaging and around the communications piece, also elevating the role of men, particularly that they play, who have high level decision-making roles. So elevating that. I shared that SGP had done a café on the role of men. It was very, very good. So maybe we should bring that back. Also around looking at the movement and the mobilization of resources, having more collaborative efforts around that piece, so that, again, we know who are the funders and donors to help move the work. And I think that probably sums up a little bit. Didn't go into much detail, but that was some of the highlights. And Anna and Deb, either of you can jump in if I missed some critical point.
Thank you so much, Carmen. And in the interest of time, if somebody has some burning intervention, please let me know.
Yeah. Well, I can. I mean, by the way, was there a kind of volunteer for the breakout room too? because I found myself as a volunteer. Just
I don't think we have enough people for the like volunteers for the
that's good. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Okay. So actually, yeah, we more or less, discussed the same things, in breakout room 2. And we shared, some problems in different continents, different locations. There were like people from Nigeria, from Indonesia, Caribbean region, Sudan also. So problems are more or less the same. So maybe I can stress two interesting things for the response part. So one is there is a need to understand also the other people, the others, anti-gender movement people. So we need a kind of more open discussion to understand the reasons behind the anti-gender movement, why they advocate for it, why there is a very strong like reaction against gender rights and gender itself, or the discussions, why they are disturbed. Probably they are, like simply they are like homophobic or transphobic people, but we know that there are some different grounds and reasons behind this. So we need to understand the reasons also to plan our long-term strategy. Also, the second point is, I think this is actually interesting to think about more the generational divide. And we know that the new generation is much more open about these discussions, around gender equality, queer and stuff. So not only in the global north, but global south also. So there was a kind of, for instance, an intervention from Sudan. So it's a global fact. So the upcoming generation is different. So this might be kind of good advantage for us to fill the discussions and open new conversations around gender equality and gender rights. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you to the folks who are adding interventions from the breakouts in the chat. And I'm also just going to reiterate, you can share the notes with us at info@genderprofessionals.org. If you have any written notes, please do share those. And all of this information will be compiled and posted to the website. There's also a feedback form, the link to which I've put into the chat. I unfortunately have to go because I have a meeting starting very soon that I'm going to be late for. But thank you, everybody.
Sorry, just to add that we had a very interesting discussion and I took some notes and I will share it because we're running out of time.
Thank you, Gergana, appreciate it. And thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to step off, but as SGP's ethos is, there's always others taking up the work and we collaborate that way. So I leave everybody in the hands of my wonderful colleagues. Take care. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
We can, if people still want to have a discussion, we can still
Thank
stay
you.
on. We don't have to leave the room.
Thank
But that's
you.
Aparna, you said something, or Syra? Who said?
Aparna, yeah.
Yeah, I was
Aparna,
just
you were saying something.
Tyra wanted to leave, but we can all stay on if we wanted to hear from other breakout
okay.
rooms.
Okay, keep
Yeah.
discussing.
Okay. Then can I just share a few things from
Yeah.
our discussion?
Yeah.
Well, so
People.
just a second. Okay. So we had a very interesting and very insightful discussion. So firstly, we mentioned that these anti-gender narratives, they really proliferate in a number of spaces. So especially in the context of Africa, we mentioned that they permeate like the cultural spaces, the legal spaces, the religious spaces. So it's literally everywhere. And then we also discussed that we need to, and when we look at this phenomenon, the anti-gender movement as a whole, we need to explore it, not leaving aside the context of post-colonial nationalism. Something else that we discussed, actually a very good example was given by an influencer who is quite popular currently in Kenya, as far as I remember. And he's a masculinist, so he's like a role model for many young men. And this led us to the discussion that we need to find maybe new means, new channels, new ways to counter anti-gender movement or toxic masculinity or all the other kinds of masculinities. Well, at least the bad ones. So then something else that we discussed was that, and maybe this was the main message, because I think most of us agreed with it, is that maybe the biggest strength of the anti-gender movement is that it has clear messages. They might, but their messages, they're clear and they appeal to people. They have their podiums and they know what they're going to say and who they're going to say it to. So if we really want to oppose the anti-gender movement, we should maybe apply the same tactics. So know what our podiums are, have a new language, know what our language should be, and maybe who the addressees of our messages are.
Thank you, Gorgana. Does anyone else want to share anything on the subject from your breakout rooms, or if you haven't had a chance to share your perspective yet? Did we hear from all rooms?
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
There were like 4 rooms or 3?
There were 5 rooms, 5.
5.
So
I
just
think,
to share very
I realized.
briefly from our breakout room, I think that it resonated a lot with us. Also the same notions about strategic communications, how the anti-gender movements, how they have a unified message. And we talked about the need for long-term funding on projects that try to advance gender-related issues. And maybe flexibility in language or tapping also to local values and our local languages to defend human rights and the advance of gender-related issues. And I took some notes, so I'm going to share them by email, but I think that the answers are very similar. We also talked about neocolonialism, how it's a message that it actually has a lot of truth about it. So it is real. We are working and we are living in neo-colonial societies as well. So it's something to consider when we want to advocate for gender equality. And yeah, again, thank you so much to everyone. It was so amazing. And the conversation in our breakout room was incredible. Thank you.
And just, something to add to Violetta, neo-colonial and neo-liberal. Maybe we don't discuss much the economic aspect of the anti-gender movement. I mean, I'm not talking about how they finance the movement, but there is a kind of, neoliberal aspect of the movement. So maybe we can discuss more with economists. I don't know, maybe Marxist economists or socialist economists to understand more about this in the near future. I don't know. At least I have this type of, need to understand better the reasons behind the anti-gender movement. And yeah, just, speaking of this, because yes, like gender movement around the world, we are, this is a global movement, okay, but we have seen that we are weak against this anti-gender because, they are backed by the religious organizations, state, and other institutions globally. But still, I think it's very important to try to understand the reasons why people, like ordinary people, why they are against the gender and gender rights. Or maybe are they against the gender or gender rights, or are they against the illusion of the gender or the narrative, around the gender? So maybe we have to also make a distinction between these two when we advocate around gender and gender equality or gender rights. Yeah. I think Gargano, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to point out a very interesting comment that I saw by Mirko Fernandez, whether, and it's an interesting point, what's the role of women in backlash groups and how backlash groups feel more legitimate when they have women who are very visible and vocal. I just thought it's interesting, and maybe this is one of the topics we can discuss in future events on the anti-gender movement. Because actually, coming back to Bulgaria, the leader of the self-proclaimed leader of the informal anti-gender movement is a woman, and she's the chair of the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which brings me back to Sinam's point that maybe at a later point we should include also economists and, you know, specialists in political parties, because it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yes, I think so. Thanks.